Okay, good morning. As a preliminary matter, let me introduce myself. I'm Peter Halley, the current chair of the ACNVT, and permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda, I guess we're waiting for one of those persons, are present and can hear me. I take it everybody who currently is on can hear me at this point.
Yes.
Good. Great.
Yep.
Good. Okay, so members, if you would each affirm in the affirm that you're here. So Peter Halley's here, Kathy Baird is here, Donald Green is here, Gary Beller is here, Peter Kahn is here, and I think those are our members. At this point, I think we're expecting one or two more, but we're going to proceed so we can be in a somewhat timely manner, and that gives us a quorum. Brooke Moore is here. Thank you, Brooke. And we'll get started in a second. So this is an open meeting conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order and any extensions that have been made. Somebody is talking. Maybe people should mute their microphones if they're not intending to be heard. That's great. In order to mitigate the transmission of COVID, this order was made, and we've been advised and directed by the Commonwealth that it's okay to hold, continue to hold our virtual meetings in this way, so long as we make them available to the public. And this has been noticed and is duly available to the public. The order can be posted with agenda materials for this meeting, and we are ensuring public access. We're doing this meeting by video conference via the town's Zoom app, and we're looking forward to continuing to do that while the order is in effect. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body, for example, the minutes are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Here are the ground rules. Before we turn to the first item on the agenda, here's the way we're going to operate so that we can ensure accurate meeting minutes and effective conduct of this meeting. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair, I will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold your name until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response that you would like to make or comments you want to give, please wait until I recognize you and I yield the floor to you, and then state your name before speaking. If members of the committee wish to engage in conversation with other members, please do so through me, taking care to identify yourself. After members have spoken, I will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. So those are the working rules, and I think they're by now people have probably memorized them. The So we'll, I think, proceed just before we get to Brooke Moore by approving the agenda for the meeting and approving the minutes of the last meeting. So do I hear a motion to approve today's agenda?
I'll move.
Okay, any second?
Don seconded, I think, right?
Okay,
Well,
and all
I
those
would
in
have done
favor,
both.
just raise your right hand or any hand that you have available. And good, that the agenda is approved. And then do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
So moved. So moved.
Second? All those in favor, raise your right hand. Okay, thank you. It's approved. Okay, so our agenda, our first item of business, now that we're through the formalities, is to welcome our guest speaker, Brooke Moore. Brooke, as you know, is currently the newest member, but I don't think she's going to be the newest member for long of the select board. And she has graciously agreed to address us. We have traditionally heard from members of the select board because our job is to provide advice to the select board. And so we like to know a little bit about the select board members and what you're thinking as well, and find out how we can be helpful. And so, Brooke, without further ado, other than to say, you know, I've read a lot about you. Your public service is legendary. Unfortunately, continues. It really is. I attended by video the housing presentation that was made about 10 days ago, I think. And we've heard from housing has been a recurring item on our agendas over the years. And it impressed me that the town has come a long way in those years and has a long way to go. So we look forward to your remarks this morning, and thank you for coming to join us.
Well, thanks for having me. On that note, I have just dropped a link to the video of the meeting you referenced into the chat, and I'm also going to drop a link to the PDF version of Tucker Holland's slides from his presentation, so you can look at them separate from the video if you'd like. And on that note, I'm going to start with housing. And for some of you who may have attended that session, some of this is going to feel repetitive, but I think it's worth sharing for the record in this recorded meeting in case you have a constituency that won't otherwise hear this information. So the town and the voters kicked into gear on getting to addressing the housing crisis in 2019 with the passage at town meeting of the $20 million Neighborhood First allocation bonding authorization and an additional $5 million of CPC, Community Preservation Committee bonding authorization. And that funding really kickstarted all the progress that's been made in the intervening years. The Neighborhood First group evaluated that warrant article and determined that there are really a couple of goals that we need to achieve. Perhaps first and foremost is to get housing for the people who need it. And second, to establish and maintain our position at safe harbor under Chapter 40B. And so the Affordable Housing Trust, where I've served for 5.5 years, I think now, that's been what we've prioritized in the spending of those funds. And we think a lot about creating a variety of housing units to meet what is a broad and deep need of housing, both on the rental market, eventually into the home ownership market more. We have done some, but hope to do more at multiple income levels. So Chapter 40B encourages, by virtue of how it's structured, rental developments because 100% of the units count even if only 25% of the units are qualified at the 80% area median income level. And the presentation has a lot more details about this. So anyway, so we focused on rental housing primarily to stay in safe harbor and to get toward that 10% number, which for us is currently 490 units, set to reset in spring when the state evaluates the 2020 census data and determines what our number of year-round housing units is, and therefore what our 10% goal will be. We don't know what that's going to be. The census indicated many more occupied homes than had been in the last census, significantly more occupied homes, but we think that COVID resulted in a lot of people being in their homes at the time of the census in 2020 when they really aren't residents or year-round residents of Nantucket. So that's what's taking the state a while to evaluate what those numbers really mean, because this sets a number for us for 10 years in terms of what we have to achieve. So really important that they get it right. We hope they will get it right. And they've kept pushing the date on that out, and we're now expecting it sometime in the spring. In terms of demand, I'd love to share some statistics that are concerning, should be concerning to the community about the shortage, quantifying the shortage. The Richmond Great Point Company has more than 500 Nantucket resident families qualified that have applied for their rental housing and are qualified based on their employment here, their income, etc. They only have 98 more units to build at development. So Housing Nantucket has 266 families on its ready to rent list. So those are people who filled out applications seeking rental housing. They have 99 qualified covenant home buyers who've find a home. And the Landmark House, which houses our seniors, has over 100 people on its wait list. So we have a significant shortage of housing units. Not all the people who've applied for these programs are without housing, but a lot of what I understand anecdotally is it's a situation where a single person lives in a room in their parents' house, and then they couple up and their partner moves in. And now there are two people living in a room in their parents' house or sharing a room in a house with multiple other people. And then they want to start a family and they have a baby. And now we have parents and a baby living in a bedroom in the grandparents' house. And so these are people who are not unhoused, but they're significantly underhoused for their needs. And there's nowhere for people to go as their family needs change, both up and down. Retirees looking to downsize, people who get divorced and need two homes now instead of one home. There's no fat in the system. I know of a family who bought a home, two siblings who bought a multiple dwelling property together, and the tenants couldn't and didn't move out on the date that they were supposed to move in last week. And so it's a case of it's not the fault of any individuals. These are folks who are now landlords who are having to evict someone who has nowhere to go. There's no bad guys in all of this. It's just people with needs that our system can't meet. What have we done? We've had over $70 million of borrowing authorization and town funding since 2019. We focused initially on some land acquisitions. We've acquired 135, 137, and with the land bank for the first time co-acquired 141 Orange Street. We acquired 7 Amelia Drive. We acquired 12 and 12R Bartlett Road. We acquired the UMass property between the Coast Guard housing and the hospital property where Fairwinds is housed. And then we've done some other interesting things where we accelerated the development of rental units at Richmond Great Point. They approached us and said, we have a construction timeline that's years out. However, if we could get some financing, from the town, we could bring that development timeline up 2 years faster. So this summer, 12 units, 24 units were built and are currently almost fully occupied. And not only did we accelerate the timeline, we also bought down an additional 6. Only 6 of those units would be deed restricted, and we bought down another 6 units at a higher price point. So now 12 of those 24 units are deed restricted affordable. So those are the kind of things we're doing with the funding. We also funded the acquisition of 31 Fairgrounds on behalf of Housing Nantucket, where they're building, and loaned them almost $7 million to construct 22 apartments that you can see going up now. The first 2 buildings are up. The remaining modular units are due to be delivered through the fall, with hopeful occupancy in January. And those will all be deed restricted at 80% and 150%, up to 150% area median income. And those will be allocated by lottery. So we're doing a lot of good work. It's a drop in the bucket when you look at those demand numbers, honestly. We have to do it progressively in order to stay in safe harbor with Chapter 40B. So even if we took all the money and could build all the units overnight, if we can't get to 490 overnight, we're out of safe harbor again. So we have to do it incrementally, which is really frustrating. And then things happen like Tacoma Green, which was supposed to provide 2 years of safe harbor, went through the entire appeals process. 4+ years later, we have a construction cost shortfall of over $12 million that we're trying to figure out before we can make that project move forward. So that's 64 families that would have been housed had the planning board process not been appealed for the duration it was appealed. But the good news is that the conversation has changed since 2018, 2019, when that happened. The community, sadly, because the problem has become starkly worse, the communities come together in a different way and different conversations are happening. And so we had a family like the Birds over on White Street offered to sell us a property at a bargain sale price that will eventually have probably some home ownership units on it. So that's kind of I did more than I planned to, because I was going to send you to the video, but I can't help myself get into the details on housing. It's my thing. Any questions about housing? I was going to go on and talk about short-term rental work group, and then just some things that are coming up for the select board this fall, and just some big picture stuff that's overarching in our work. So questions on housing?
Yeah, I just a quick question on the numbers of qualified people. Is there any duplication in those qualifications?
Likely there is. Yes,
Yeah.
likely there is. So it's not a cumulative number. And it's also I know I talk to people every day, virtually every day, who I'm advising to get on these wait lists, who are not on any of these wait lists. So while we know there's duplication, it's also an underrepresentation in another area. So
Thanks. Any other questions on this subject? I'm not hearing or seeing any. So
Don.
I see Gary and Don.
Yeah. Don?
Okay, I'll go first. I was just wondering about the zoning regulations, and which designated zones are you allowed to build these units in?
So deed restricted affordable housing can be anywhere on Nantucket. Generally speaking, it's more cost effective to build in the core areas where there's water, sewer, public transportation, and other resources to reduce car trips. Building out in the hinterlands is expensive because of septic, and we're getting new septic regulations, and there's going to be more. It's going to get more expensive to build septic and replace septic going forward. We're just hearing about this from the state. So from a cost-effective point of view, property values are more cost-effective in the Mid-Island and central areas of Nantucket. For us to acquire a property in Shimo or Pulpus is not cheap. So and the zoning, we generally try to build within existing zoning without asking for zoning waivers. So those areas are very low density in terms of what you can do anyway, which makes the per unit cost very high. But that does not mean that going forward, if we develop a community land trust and acquire properties for home ownership, that they could not be scattered all over Nantucket. So
I just said, it's not really a corollary, but I didn't know what is counted in the denominator.
so
Is
Uh,
like second homes, are they counted or not counted?
no, it's year-round occupied homes determined. You mean in determining our SHILUS number?
Yes.
No, it's year-round occupied homes
Okay.
count it's 10% of year-round occupied homes.
Okay, that's what I thought, but I just wanted to be sure about.
Yeah, otherwise we'd never get there.
Okay. Gary, I think you had a question?
Well, I have some thoughts I'd like to share with Brooke and kind of ask a question in the same vein. First, I just want to mention that 7 Amelia Drive is a piece of property that I sold to the town several years ago to make it easy for them to get a passage from the parking lot as well, and also talking with town officials to give them another opportunity for affordable housing. But one thing you said, which I think is correct, you said the conversation has changed. However, my view is it hasn't changed enough. So let me tell you what my thoughts are about that. And I might be a minority on the island in thinking this, and this is certainly not something that our committee has come to a conclusion of. I think that when we think about the most serious issues facing the island of Nantucket today, to me, it's very clear. Number one issue is affordable housing. We need affordable housing. People need that so that businesses can have workers, families can continue to stay here. So it's the number one issue, okay? That's the good news. The bad news is the conversation hasn't changed enough to get people to take that seriously. And part of the debate is the pressure between the environmentalists and real people. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that if this really was the number one concern of the islands, then several years ago, when the annual town meeting was presented with a choice to let's use a certain percentage of this land bank funds for affordable housing, they turned it down. Why? The environmentalists said, no, I think we have enough land in conservation for the rest of, I'm on the Coastal Resilience Committee through 2100, 2200 even, 2200. But so there's an enormous amount of land that's in conservation, and the land bank has been getting unbelievable amounts of money. Last year, remember, they got $50 million. And so what are they doing with the $50 million? Well, what they did this week, which drove me nuts, is they bought the property on Long Pond, right? Which is fine. It's another $5 or $6 million of land bank funds. And yes, it's a lovely public amenity. We have enough public amenities, enough land bank property all over. So what happens? So we go to the annual town meeting, and once again, we're turned down. So I guess my concern is that the conversation hasn't changed enough. And when that much money is coming off the tax rolls from people buying property, and it's not used to take care of our number one property, that's why I guess I'm frustrated about it.
Okay, thank you. So any other members of the committee that have any questions on this subject? Peter Kahn. Yeah.
Thank you, Brooke, for joining us. I appreciate it, and also appreciate your service. I guess my sense here is that we have obviously made a great deal of progress, albeit not enough, on the housing issue. The thing that troubles me is is that I believe that possibly we haven't made as much progress as we could because of some of the design issues. I must say it's kind of a strange thing, but the design issues, for example, the Richmond Great Point property, to me, it's an eyesore, and it's an eyesore to many people. And there's no reason it has to be. Or you know, Beach Plum or whatever it's called are well-designed properties. How did am I the only one who thinks that? Are you hearing that from others? Barn, you know, everything's a barn, and it's you know, it's just.
So you broke up a little there. I mean, I can't speak to the Richmond Great Point. That was a memorandum of understanding that was executed a number of years ago by a prior select board at a time when the situation was very different in terms of where we were in Chapter 40B, what the concerns were about not being in safe harbor at that time, and I think when perhaps some of the folks who were on that board might acknowledge that they weren't as smart about affordable housing or as attuned to or attentive to, and got, you know, were presented a proposal that they had to negotiate. I've had people say to me, wow, Sachem's Path is the best affordable housing development we've ever done on Nantucket. You want to guess how long it took to get Sachem's Path through? Just take a wild guess. Anybody?
10 years.
15 years. 6 different town meetings, I think. And when it was built, everyone screamed and yelled that it was an eyesore. And then the trees grew in, and everyone thinks it's the most beautiful thing that's ever been done on Nantucket. So I understand, and you're not the only person who has expressed dissatisfaction with the appearance of the building sizes at Richmond Great Point. If you go and look at the design features of 31 Fairgrounds, you'll see it's very different. Even Tacoma Green, very different. So it's been an iterative process over a number of years. And the good news is when you're in a proactive planning mode, you have a lot more opportunity to control those things than if you're in a reactive mode, which being out of safe harbor has put us in the past. And so I think we're in much better positioned as we were with 31 Fairgrounds to work in partnership with developers in the design. And all of that went through HDC. You know, apartment buildings are allowed on Nantucket. They are allowed on Nantucket. It was new and it's different. But when I look across the street at, I mean, I've been here a long time. And I remember when Gnaw Shop was considered the very worst thing that ever happened to Nantucket. And that's not a conversation we're having anymore. And so in my mind, I balance the need for change to meet the needs of a growing community, because we're a growing community. And the single family house of the backyard is never going to produce enough housing for the workforce that we need here and the community that we have now. And so that's where my head is at when I think about this. It's about reasonable compromises and incremental change that we frankly can't afford not to accept. And I can tell you, for the people who have housing at Richmond, they don't care a whit what it looks like. They have a home, and that is meaningful to them. And I remember when they couldn't sell those lots to year-rounders for love nor money. No year-rounder wanted to live there, and that in the home ownership lots, and they're all gone now. They're all sold. And a lot of year-rounders are moving into or building houses in that neighborhood, or businesses have acquired them to build duplexes for employees. And I think that will, what I hope is that it will fade into the background as trees get planted, as as they grow and as it becomes more like Noshop or more like Sachem's Path over time. And so it's a good question. And that's why, you know, we talk about building within zoning limits and trying to do what's appropriate. But it is changed. There was some resistance to 31 Fairgrounds from that neighborhood. And that development is completely within zoning, within the flex zoning. And it will have that lawn with the trees on it in perpetuity because now that's deed restricted. And the housing will be set back, and that's what flex zoning allows. And so we're trying to be creative in terms, but all the people who are on these waiting lists live and work here already. They're not coming from somewhere else. So
yeah.
that's my, you know, that's the goal of what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, I think we should move on to, I'd like to hear your other thoughts. My only observation is I heard the word compromise. I looked it up. My dictionary doesn't define that word at all in modern terms. It is a struggle. It's like threading the eye of the needle. And I think the thread is in the eye of the needle, and now you've got something to sew.
Yeah.
And that's progress.
And to Gary's point about conservation, look, I was the sponsor of Article 97. Full disclosure, you know, that was an article that I crafted with a group of people, housing advocates, and was out promoting. What I've learned in governance, I think overall, but particularly on Nantucket, an idea may seem radical the first time it's presented for robust discussion, and it becomes less radical over time if there's grains of truth behind the idea. And I think that Article 97 did spark the conversations that are happening around the balance of conservation and housing, and there's more to come. Gary, I can promise you there are conversations that are happening about that very topic. And I meet with conservation folks all the time in recent months, and they understand that we all have a role to play in solving the housing crisis where we can. And so I'm really hopeful in new ways. And the other thing that's really big that's changed, and then I'll move on from housing, is that we have had a number of property owners approach the trust with offers to sell property before they put it on the open market. And that never happened. Never. As far as I know. So, and that's happened multiple times in the last several years. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But the idea that property owners think to come to us in the way that conservation-minded property owners think to go to the land bank before they sell their property, that is a sea change in what's happening. So progress is slow and incremental and frustrating in government and public policy, but we keep plugging away at it. And it's, you know, one of the reasons I ran for select board was to keep pushing on some stuff that's important to me. So I'll quickly go over short-term rental work group. You guys are probably pretty aware of it because you'll have a seat on that group, but application deadline passed on August 26th. The appointment process now goes forward at its moderated pace, and the appointments will be made at the select board meeting on September 21st. And just the idea here, everyone who's on that appointing authority, which is 3 select board members, myself, Matt and Jason, and Denise Krona from finance, and Dave Iverson from planning board, is to balance as many perspectives as we can among the members of that group, and encourage and try to appoint people who are open-minded and willing to set aside the binary discussion that we had at ATM last year on Article 42 and 43, and start from the ground up and consider the options, figure out what information they need to evaluate the options, come up with options, figure out what's possible, what's best for the community, and then come forward with some proposals for zoning bylaw for next town meeting. We hired a very skilled and experienced public policy facilitator And she is, I was lucky enough to be one of the people who interviewed her. She is going to be great at making sure that all voices at the table are met, and that, you know, data is the appropriate data and information is found to back up any decisions the group makes. And it's a short timeline. It's an aggressive timeline. You know, the warrant closes at the end of January for town meeting. So we'll see, but it's got to be done right. It's got to be done right. So fast, if it can't be done, I mean, this is just me speaking. If it doesn't look like it can be done right in that timeline, then we'll have another conversation, but we're hopeful that it will be something presented to town meeting. Because we know that the lawsuits and the stuff that are out there are hanging. As we found with Tacoma Green, the legal process is very slow. So the likelihood that anything that's in process goes to a final decision is in the next year or two is unlikely, but we know it weighs heavily on the minds of folks who do short-term rentals. And I want to get this done. I wish it had been done the year before, but it wasn't. So that's that. Any questions there?
Yeah, just one question on in addition to a facilitator, will this group have a legal advisor? And because you mentioned lawsuits, and it seems to me that while you can't avoid lawsuits entirely, that drafting proposed regulations that have the highest probability of taking into account, you know, all the legal precedents, and they're coming down daily right now, all over the United States, might ease the way, because you know, while some precedents are binding on this area and others are only persuasive, it seems to me if you take the binding ones and the most persuasive ones together, you can avoid a lot of legal pitfalls.
Yeah, so we are apprised all the time of this, you know, through our town council's monitoring this all the time, for the plan on behalf of the planning department as well. And the other thing I failed to mention is we actually had 2 applicants for facilitation, and one of them was Judy Barrett, who is a land use specialist who does facilitation. We ended up hiring the expert facilitator, but we also hired Judy because she'll bring the land use and expertise in terms of the legality of any zoning article and how it fits into the landscape. So we really got the best of both worlds. She's on an as-needed consulting contract for the work group, as it works probably more toward the end as it tries to frame actual articles for town meeting. So the answer is town council will be on this, and if they need additional support, they will. You know, the town administration and select board have committed the resources to get this done well and get it right.
Good. Kathy Baird.
Thank you. Thanks, Brooke, for coming and joining us today. Just a couple questions on the timeline. I thought I heard somebody at the select board meeting saying that the warrants needed to be in by November. So I'm first confused about that and the January date. And then the second question has to do with the timing of getting the data. If a bunch of the data that needs to be collected is going to be collected by the new bylaw it's in draft, and that data won't be available until after January. It kind of puts the group in a position where they don't really have that data that they might need. So that's the second question. Thank you.
Sure. So I'll take your second question first. The town has executed a contract with Granicus, and they are already under contract and looking at data. I don't know when they actually start, but that contract is not waiting for January, as I understand it. And then and there is just a lot of data out there wherever we have to find it. If they have to execute, if the group has to execute a different contract for some research, that is possible as well. And then timeline for warrant articles, citizen warrant articles, the deadline is November. For town-sponsored articles, it's January. My hope is, you know, obviously that presents a risk for people, citizens who want to see something happen, right? The group's in process. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out, to be honest with you, but you're right. The citizen warrant article deadline is November. And the town sponsored is January. The select board, I think it's right at the end of January, we're scheduled to finalize the warrant.
Any other members have a question, observation on this subject? I can't see hands on my things, but that it looks like I don't see anybody
I don't see
saying.
anybody.
Okay, so we can. Are there other things that you would like to cover?
So briefly, I just want what's coming up for us. Obviously, is we start now to prepare for annual town meeting. The budget cycle begins. Review of warrant articles through the fall by the planning board, FinCom, and select board for motions and comments. And then there's a lot of work happening in town administration on employee compensation and retention. And succession planning. And I'm looking forward to getting some reports out to the select board on that process that's been ongoing. And a lot of people aren't aware that that's happening. So town administration is looking into where our compensation sits in the landscape of hiring and retaining town employees in the long term. And then of course, also how housing fits into that and what the town can do on the housing side. And then, I want to just sort of touch on some like the big picture overarching things that inform all of the work we do and how we prioritize. Obviously, coastal resiliency and hazard mitigation, the work being done on diversity, equity, and inclusion, sort of runs all the way through town administration and town government, and will get, more and more, seen and heard across boards and committees, as I understand it. And that work is being overseen by Dr. Kamal McCarthy, who's the DEI director. And that's all new in the last couple of years. So, I was a founding member of Nantucket Equity Advocates. So that makes me really happy that we thought we were going to have to push the town toward this work. And the town really embraced it in a big way, which is important to me. And then, some of the challenges are, just staffing and project management capacity. We had a lot of projects that didn't happen because of COVID, and now they're all stacked up. And it takes people, projects, even when they get funding, need people to coordinate and run them. And there are some staff shortages. So that's been a challenge on administration side of, I know there was a project that was talked about in my neighborhood 4 years ago that just kind of got pushed to the side, with COVID. And so stuff we thought was coming is, sort of behind. And then of course, new things come up and everyone has to decide, does this replace something else? Or, what is the prioritization? And I think that speaks to the strategic plan and lining things up, and constantly looking and evaluating the select board strategic plan and how we communicate to town administration what we think the priorities should be in general and project-based, et cetera. So, I'm always coming up with lots of new ideas, and Libby's always saying to me, well, that's great, but just let me know when you need my staff's time, because they don't have a lot of time. They've got a lot of stuff going on. So we're always trying to balance that and collaborate together in a good working relationship. And that's part of what I really enjoy about being on the select board. I attended every meeting for 4 years, and I can tell you that I probably knew about 50% of what I'm needing to know to be a select board member. And so despite that attendance rate, the learning curve has been quite steep, even for me. I can't imagine someone just deciding to run, having never been involved in public meetings like this one, or just even understanding how our government functions, and what the competing priorities are and how we allocate the resources, et cetera. So I'm a little bit of a government geek, so it's been kind of fun too. So that's kind of it, unless anybody has any questions.
That's great. Any questions before I say thank you so much? Gary Beller.
So let me get on my soapbox again. one of the other subjects that I have felt strongly about, in fact, I even made a speech to the select board, I think just prior to your being elected to it. And that's my continuing dissatisfaction with the fact that the decisions being made by our legislature, which is the annual town meeting, are being made by such a small population that they do not fairly represent the mood or the will or the wishes of the community. And in my little talk to the select board at one of those, where they asked for public comments a couple of months ago, I mentioned that the last annual town meeting, the first day, we had less than 12% of the voters. We have 9,200 voters, and we had less than 12% of the voters in the auditorium and the gym for the first day. For the second day, we had less than 6% of the total population. And when you think that these controversial issues that we are dealing with are being represented by a very small part of the population, people that have the time to spend, don't have young children to watch, are not incapable of travel because they have illnesses or temporary or permanent, it just drives me cuckoo. So I was a big fan of the Town Government Study Committee headed up by John Brescher. And one of the recommendations of the committee, one of their final recommendations, was that a committee be reestablished, but this time with a singular focus on looking at the form of town government. Because having studied this and listened to all of their meetings, I'm convinced that the representative form of government would be much more democratic, would get much more of the population having their views represented by the various representatives that'll represent each portion of the island. And I must say, Brooke, that your particular article, the one talking about using land bank fees, might have been a different result. You know, we have, I don't know how many people are on the waiting list for affordable housing, 500, 1,000, maybe 2,000. But just think if those 2,000 people could have had a chance to vote, because they can't all get to those meetings. And by the way, they're not going to get to next spring's meeting as well. You know, it's one day Saturday, you got 8 hours. Believe me, you're not going to get most of the voters showing up. So you're not going to get a really good percentage of voters. But if those same voters had a representative who could, and they all say, you know, Brooke had a great idea, you know, there's so much money. We're taking 25% of the land bank fee. They don't need 50 million or 40 million, you know, they can do pretty well, right? But unfortunately, when you get such a few people showing up, just think about it. The article that passed that makes all of the beaches topless, that was what 320 people voting in favor of it. And of course people say, well, the town voted. Well, the town didn't vote. A handful of activists came to the meeting. They knew what the article was and they stayed. And so what I asked the select board to do 2 months ago when I spoke is to please get going again and get the town government study committee going. Now, unfortunately, in their work last year, in the last 2 years, they did a good job of covering a lot of issues. The one thing they didn't do was to start educating the island public on how representative government works. And so there's no great call for it here, at least now, because people are not aware of how it might enable many, many, many more people to have a say in how the laws are enacted for the island of Nantucket. So I hope that, you know, when we spoke to Libby, she was here, it was very nice to always join us for our first meeting of the season in June. And she said, yes, it's on their agenda to reinstitute the committee. And we're hoping that the select board does that in the near future. Thank you.
Yep, and it requires staff support and staff time. So back to my original comment. It's, you know, it fits in the, I agree with you, and I can talk about the merits of our form of government with you all day, Gary. So just, so, yeah, I mean, I would like to evaluate our options more thoroughly as well.
Great.
So Don's had his hand up for a while. I don't know, Peter, whether you can see him.
If not, Don, put on your microphone.
Okay. The question I had was, leaving government aside, where do the funds come from for affordable housing, and who is contributing to it?
So, in fiscal 2019, I think there was $300,000 in the budget, and then there were some CPC funds that year. Since then, there's been $2 million of budget direct within the budget money that is allocated for the housing office staff. There's some borrowing that's been funded by a portion of that, and then a chunk of it goes to programs like closing cost assistance and some other programs that we have within. And then most of it is done by debt exclusion, by borrowing, or by borrowing against future revenues of the CPC, the combination of the two. So primarily it's debt exclusion. We've been pursuing an additional transfer fee of 0.5% at the State House for years and years. Actually, most people don't know the first time that was tried was in 1986, right after the land bank was formed. There was an effort to add an additional transfer fee to buy and set aside land for year-rounders to build houses on. And the legislature has never seen clear to pass our home rule petitions. We have a very, very, very strong lobby, anti-lobby from the Massachusetts Association of Realtors. They're a powerful lobby, and so far we've been unable to break through. This year there was as concerted an effort as ever. I think 9 or 11 communities now we were the only ones for a long time, and we now, it's 9 or 11 other Massachusetts communities have put forth home rule petitions similar to ours. There was an effort to create a statewide enabling legislation, but the governor indicated he would veto it. And there was some squabbling in communities about the details of it, so it never really coalesced into a statewide effort that could pass. There was a last-minute push for all the other communities to step back and try to allow Nantucket to get our home rule petition. The strategy was to tack it on as an amendment to the economic development bill that was a high priority for the governor. And Julian Sear did that from the Senate side, and it was clear he didn't have the votes for it to get through the amendment process. And so he withdrew it. And because Baker indicated he was going to veto it as well. So there's now an effort to begin already to work with what is the presumed governorship of Maura Healey to start again with the next legislative session. And that would give us somewhere between $2 and $5 million a year against which we can borrow a lot of money and make a lot of progress. But that's not in our hands. It's up at the State House, and we hired communications firms, and the Vineyard hired a lobbyist, and we still couldn't get it across the finish line. It was very, very frustrating.
Well,
So
I was thinking more of nonprofits who get funding from individuals who have the wherewithal to contribute to it. I mean, we have some very endowed people on this island.
yes. And the vehicle for that will likely be a community land trust that is in development now. It'll be an independent nonprofit. And the idea behind a community land trust can do a lot of things, but the basic premise is I have a house worth $1.5 million. the bank will give you a mortgage for $1 million. In order to split that difference, we take either municipal or philanthropic dollars, we acquire the land, lease it to you for 99 years. You're able to get a leasehold mortgage like any other mortgage. You own the house, and when you sell that house, the deed restricts who you can sell it to. It has to be another year-round resident, and at what price you can sell it. So it allows for a level of appreciation that does not match the market, but does allow for equity growth and wealth building over time. But that house remains in a separate market available only to year-round residents of Nantucket in perpetuity. And that is in development now and is likely the place where the opportunity for folks with resources who want to solve this problem to contribute.
Thank you.
And that will build home ownership opportunities that we haven't been able to focus on because of the demands of Chapter 40B.
Okay, anybody else? I heard somebody say,
Peter,
Gary.
did you not see us all?
I with my setup here, I'm seeing, I have to keep shifting up and down on the right-hand
Look
side.
on the upper right-hand corner. There's a nice checkered box there. Why don't you check that, the view? And then you'll get everybody at the same time. You see the view box?
When I check that, something different happens
Oh. you don't get to see
on
everybody.
mine. So it just doesn't work that way. I'll get it. Oh, view way up there. Okay,
Yeah.
up there.
View?
The gallery. Ah,
Yes.
good.
You
This
got
is
it?
Hi,
like
we're all here now.
Hollywood Squares. Good. So Gary, yes.
Quick question, by the way, that's the extent of my technical prowess on Zooming.
No,
Question for
got it.
Brooke.
No.
Question for Brooke is, do you folks know yet, or do we know, does the town know whether or not the various articles, the home rule articles that had to go up to the state Attorney General to be approved, do we know whether or not they have been approved? I was thinking, the one I was thinking about, you started talking before about the upcoming annual town meeting. And one of those articles, which we were in favor of, would be to change the number of signatures needed, from 10 to 50 or something like that. So there wouldn't be so much craziness going on at the annual town meeting for the 35 people that show up each year. Do you know whether or not that was approved, the Article 78, the home rule petition?
As far as I know, the AG's office is still looking at almost everything. It takes forever.
Oh,
It takes forever. I mean, I remember when we set one up for Council for Human Services to stay at 9 seats instead of go to 7. It took 6 months or something, 8 months. It was like October before we could appoint somebody into the seats that, yeah. So yes, it's a very slow process, but it's a good question. I don't know, honestly. I do know of some that have been delayed. I don't know for sure. So we can find out though. So it's you're curious about the signatures?
yes, the Article 78, there a handful of
Streamlining.
of measures that would improve the functioning of our government. And we were in favor of that. And so was the town, and it passed. So I'm just curious that whether that was approved or not.
I can do my best to find out.
Okay, thanks.
So having attended a couple of the annual town meetings, including the annual town meeting under the tent, I don't know whether one or two of those where I almost froze to death. And I think that's where your article came up, as I recall. There were a lot of people there, more than 35. It was a big meeting. But my impression was that article sort of forced the town's hand to put in more money on the table, which I think came in through a separate donation. $27 million is kind of on my brain. There was some big injection from town budgets for affordable housing. Am I misremembering
Yeah,
that?
so I don't want to get into the weeds, but
Yeah.
the select board approved the short-term rental tax. And so there were several articles that year for funding affordable housing.
Yep.
One was Article 97. The other was Article 38, which was sponsored by Arthur Reed, which was to set up a stabilization fund for a portion of the short-term rental tax. And the advantage to that is it doesn't go into the budget and it's set aside. The disadvantage is it requires a 2/3 vote at town meeting. It's pretty hard to buy property when you have to tell the buyer, the seller,
Yeah.
well, wait till next town meeting, we have to get 2/3. So it wasn't an ideal, and of course, less flexible in terms of how revenues get used in the budget for the finance department and town administration. And so the compromise was they built in $2 million in the budget plus some debt exclusion articles. And that's what ended up passing that
Yeah.
you're referring to. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but it was a substantial amount of borrowing. I think it's been like, the numbers are close year to year, so I don't remember them exactly, but I think it was 17 million. And then there was another 5 from CPC that year as well. So, or maybe we skipped CPC that year. I can't remember, but it was significant. It was it did sort of promote a bigger commitment.
Yeah.
For sure,
It-
that conversation.
I think
If
that that might be in the presentation that Tucker Holland did.
Yeah, Tucker
those
has
numbers.
year by year all the funding in the slide deck in his presentation. Absolutely. The details of all of this are in Tucker's presentation. Good point. Thanks, Kathy. I also dropped into the chat the link to the page for the short-term rental work group if anyone wants to follow their work. And then, of course, I hope you all know how to search and find agendas and meeting minutes for all town government meetings on the website. It's the thing that I learned is you can set up, what I did was I went in and I selected the ones that I'm interested in, did the search, and then saved that URL as a saved in my bookmarks. And so I don't have to go through the process of searching for the ones I want every time. I just click on that bookmark and it takes me to that list only of the ones that I want to track on a regular basis. So there's a little hint from a
You can
government.
also
geek.
sign up on the website itself where it notifies you. It sends you
That's
an
true also.
email and it sends you the links to the meeting and the minutes and the agenda. So that's really helpful.
Yeah, and you create a login with on the town website for yourself and save a lot of stuff too. So. Yep.
You're on mute, Peter.
Peter, you muted.
You're muted. Okay.
Huh. I think there's a genie in my box here. But thank you very much for a very informative presentation. I think we have a much more fulsome understanding, not just of what your thinking is, but also the thinking of the select board that you represent part of, and our mission is to provide advice to the select board on matters of importance to non-resident taxpayers, and I think we've done that, and we will continue to do it. We need to organize ourselves for the short-term rental working group, where we have put in our nominees and our proposed order of who you should hopefully select as primary and secondary. The plan that I'm going to discuss with the group either later today or at some other time is how we will interact with the nominee once the nominee is selected by you all, and then hopefully be able to provide a sounding board, not just from our group as a whole, where we will take official positions when that becomes obvious, but also from other members of the public who I noticed there are 3 or 4 on today. And I hope to the extent they don't have some other route that they will participate through us so that our representative can be fully informed and let you know what non-resident taxpayers who are speaking up have been thinking.
Yeah, and that was the idea of seating various groups, was that could facilitate or enhance communication to a broader cross-section of the community. And of course, I encourage everyone, whether they're seated or not, to watch, participate, where public comment is brought into the process. And the idea is to have as many perspectives represented in this process as possible, so that that group makes the recommendations that are best for the long-term health and welfare and economy of the island with regard to short-term rentals. So I'm very much looking forward to following that process myself.
Yeah. Yes, Gary.
I just want to say that I'm so shocked, Brooke, every time I watch these select board meetings over the last few weeks, last few months, I'm so shocked by the vitriol from people speaking. It just is so horrible. I mean, you guys do a great job. You're public servants. Nobody gets paid hardly anything or at all, right? Maybe the chairperson, but it's just so unfair. And there's a lot of us watch that, and we sure appreciate the time and effort all of you folks put in. But the remarks from so many people in the public these days are so full of hostility and vitriol that I'm sorry to see that has finally arrived in Nantucket. I can see it in the rest of the country, but I didn't see it in Nantucket until recently, and now it's quite a disappointment to me. But thank you for your hard work.
Well, I appreciate that, and I will tell you, my compensation is $3,500 a year plus access to town health insurance, and my $3,500 covers my portion of the premium with a leftover paycheck of $4.87. So that's our compensation. So it has value, yes.
You're underpaid.
On a per hour basis, not so much. But we do it because we care, all of us, and I respect my select board colleagues. I have inordinate respect for town administration and the amount of work they do on a day-to-day basis. And I've taken to saying there are 10,000 things that get done every day on Nantucket that nobody notices. And I encourage people to look for those things: the pothole that gets filled in your neighborhood, or the sign that gets straightened, or the email that gets responded to. Every day, our town employees work really hard, and hopefully, we can take more time to express appreciation where you can to them. And Gary, I really appreciate it. It's been difficult, but doesn't change my resolve to keep at it.
Okay, well, I'm all for at least raising you up to $4.88, and it's I think this Nantucket is a microcosm, and there are public spirited people all over the country that make the place work, and we're lucky to see that. And today we saw one of them. And thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us. I think we've learned something of value, and I appreciate that.
My pleasure, and don't hesitate to reach out to my select board email if you have questions or want to share your thoughts. I love hearing from folks. So I'm going to head out and enjoy this beautiful day. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye.
Bye-bye. Let's see, the next thing on the menu here is all of in position to continue meeting virtual and hybrid. Let me just say that as the summer season is drawing to an end, I don't know that we have any real choice other than to continue virtual meetings until at least the next summer season. And so I would propose that that's what we do. And of course, we know there is I guess, a drop dead deadline at this point on virtual meetings, but that may or may not be extended. Gary. You need to turn on your sound. Somehow I think.
Yeah, okay. Anyway, on this subject, it's a thought we chatted about once in the last meeting or two, but you know, when I was talking with my wife, and I told her that, you know, we're frustrated that we have been unable to attract new members to the advisory committee. And my wife says to me, she says, you know, it's really easy, darling. I said, well, tell me what's easy. She says, well, you have those meetings every Saturday. Who wants to give up Saturday morning, every other Saturday morning during the season? No wonder people don't want to join your committee. So she said, why don't you meet during the week? I said, well, we started to talk about it. So I think it's something we ought to be thinking about. So what do you guys think? Should we think about whether or not we should see about changing our meeting dates so that it isn't always on a Saturday morning? It doesn't solve our virtual problem because we're not here during the week in the winter or on Saturday in the winter. But even on Saturdays in season, you know, we've not been successful in, you know, I've talked to plenty of people, as I know some of you folks have, tell them about the interesting work that we do and the fact that we get a chance to meet with town officials, to hear from them what's going on and to present to them what we hear from the people we speak to at our various, in our communities or in our meetings. And a few of them have shown some interest, but at the end of the day, the fact is they haven't, I've sent them the applications, they haven't filled out the application, they haven't sent it in. And so here we are with a pretty, this is a pretty low number for our committee. As I recall, over the last three or 4 years, we haven't had so few members, permanent members of our committee now, and it's troubling. And I don't know if the answer is Saturdays or whatever.
Well, I think it's something worth investigating. Peter Kahn.
Sure. I mean, I have not heard that the Saturday people from participating. Ironically, obviously, if not everybody is fully retired, so during the week that would eliminate. It can be done. I mean, we obviously can schedule around it. I have, you know, I think it's just a, you know, it's a more a matter of talking to people and trying to convince them that it's worthwhile. I think part of the problem is obviously that as you talk about, Gary, I mean, there are issues with the government in this town and how long it takes to get things done. And I think people are frustrated by that and saying, hey, you know, do we really make a difference, right? Is our advice really heard? So I think those are issues that are more of a concern. I personally, as you, to meet in person where we can, when we can, and I really would encourage us to do that certainly during the season. I think it's very frustrating, and in fact, I think that may be the biggest handicap to get people. Nobody wants to be on Zoom. I mean, very few people enjoy Zoom meetings anymore. You know, we're all zoomed out. During the winter, it's great for us. It makes it happy. You know, it can work for us. But during the season, a lot better if we can meet in person. So.
Yeah,
Kathy?
Peter.
Yeah.
It's interesting because what I've heard from people is kind of the opposite. They feel like, well, I can't really commit to being there all season long. I don't do that. I can't be there. So you're kind of it has to be people who are retired who can make that commitment to be physically here. So I think that the fact that we haven't been able to confirm that Zoom is an option going forward, people, like I could commit if it was Zoom, if I could be anywhere. I'd like to be here in person if I can, but I don't want to screw up the numbers if I can't be there because I'm physically off island or I have to leave or something like that. So it wasn't Saturday as much as the fact that the state hasn't made that a permanent thing yet, and that might help.
Yeah, thank you for letting me rest.
Peter, you're on mute.
I was saying, as we go forward in the fall and the winter, that maybe the occasion will arise that we would like to do something other than a Saturday, and we can give it a try out. I think if we were looking for other days, maybe people want to think about what other day would be a good day. I think we don't want to do it on the same day, because presumably it'd be in the evening, early evening, rather than during the day. I don't know. But we wouldn't want to do it at the same time select board's meeting, because I find it's very, very informative to be able to go to select board meetings and see issues that are concern to us discussed. We don't yet have the schedule of when the short-term rental working group is going to be meeting. But that, I think, is another type of meeting that people may want to be watching if they have an interest in this and seeing what's developing, so they can make appropriate comment as need be. But for me, my response to Saturdays, it's my skin cancer prevention. It's better than putting sunblock on. It's to be indoors talking with you people for 2 hours of sunshine. So that's my thought. But I think we have to continue, like everything else, nothing's set in stone. And if we need to meet on a not weekend to do better, we ought to consider that and try it out.
You know, my wife suggests that we should put an ad in the newspapers as saying, telling, a brief little ad saying, this is what we do, and we're looking for new members, something like that. What I tried a few years ago is I wrote a letter to the editor, to the Inky, and it was basically a letter say, as recently elected chairman of the advisory committee of non-voting taxpayers, just want to know this is what we do, and we meet this way, and we're looking for new members. She published that. I don't know what she hadn't published some of the other stuff that we sent in, Peter sends in, but if you'd like, Peter, I'll send you a copy of that letter that I sent, which was published, and maybe you want to write it again and stick it in, letter to the editor, so that people will know that there are openings here, and that we're receptive, and the town is receptive to adding to our population here. I'll send you the letter.
Yeah, I think we're going to have the opportunity in the not too distant future. But I would like to see the letter again. Thank you.
Okay.
So while we're on the subject, we have, I think, two things coming up that we need to be attentive to in next meetings. One, I think we discussed trying to get the Nantucket data platform person on.
Well, I'll be glad to contact Alan, but tell me what we would like. What are you thinking you want to get from those folks?
Okay. So I watched, first of all, one of the Monomoy people, I think, sent me this, which was, I think, the 1917, based on 1917, making a count, a data-driven look at Nantucket's dynamic population. It's really quite excellent, but it's getting a little bit dated now. And then I watched, he gave a presentation on, there's a Nantucket channel interview program, and he gave a presentation within the last year or so. And in that presentation, he mentioned that they had done or were doing a data collection on the attitudes of non-residents. And so I think that would be a very interesting, be very informative subject for us.
I don't think he did that, but anyway, we could find out. Yeah,
Well,
I
I
don't
think,
recall that.
yeah, I mean, I would suggest, I'd like to hear from him as to, his company, how they operate, what they've done thus far for Nantucket, and talk about issues that we might raise that could be subjects of inquiry, data inquiry by him. That would be helpful to us.
Well,
So
I can tell you this, that they're headquartered in your backyard. They're headquartered in Chevy Chase now. That's where
Right.
Alan and his wife have moved.
Uh-huh.
And they're looking for business all the time. They did get a contract from the town of Nantucket, which is why they've done that. They have been fortunate that one of their big supporters, Alan knows Wendy Schmidt, so Nantucket Resilience has been funding a number of their studies. And I think that they have done a more recent study than the one that you sent around, Peter. So, so I can contact Alan. I know he had some brief medical issues. Hopefully they're all taken care of by now, and to see whether or not either he or someone from his company can take us through the latest analysis of the data surrounding Nantucket. They have done some fabulous work showing how the population changes daily, by the hour, during the week, on weekends. I remember seeing those in past years. I don't know if they've done anything very recently, but I'll find out. And so in theory, you would like me to see if he can be a Zoom guest of ours on what date?
Well, that's the question. Should we do something before the short-term working group cranks up? And I think that would be the thing we ought to do. So something either 2 weeks.
2 weeks out, I would suggest.
2 weeks up. 2 weeks from now.
Okay, so now is the 3rd. So now
Yeah,
17th.
the 17th.
The 17th.
I don't know. I'll see if he or somebody from his company is available, if there's something they want to share with us. But I don't think it's going to have too much relevance to the short-term rental market.
No, it's a matter of time. It's just a matter, once the short-term rental gears up, we're going to want to focus on that. And
Yeah. And yeah, I think that would be good. And if he's willing to do it and he needs some more guidance as to what we're interested in, you can mention that, the issues that are up the island that data seems to be lacking on, that or he may have the data and it's just a matter of interpreting some different way.
Okay.
So that'd be good. So the 17th we're looking forward to now. And then I would suggest looking forward further is after I guess I don't know whether they're going to publish the schedule of the meetings before the 21st selection process or what, but at some point we're going to need to get that schedule. And then my thinking was that we would tend to have a meeting shortly after whatever the meeting, the short-term working group meeting is, and see if there's anything that needs to be consulted with, and for our group and for members of the public with respect to that effort. So maybe we'll discuss it again on the 17th, because we'll know more about what they're doing, hopefully. So as right now, we're going to plan to have a virtual meeting on the 17th.
Now, are there any other town officials we should be thinking about? You know, in past years, we've had the finance guy. We've had the head of the finance, we've had Denise Cronu, the head of the finance committee. We've also had the fellow, I forget his name, he's a very good guy, who's the head financial guy on the town itself.
Yeah.
Well, it may be, you know, what would be interesting, I mean, to the extent that things are moving, approaching for citizen warrants, any discussion of what's on the, you know, what's already been submitted. I mean, I guess I would assume the planning committee, I'm sorry, the finance committee rather, is aware of that, and because they're going to have to start having meetings themselves. So that it might be worth knowing what's been filed.
Nothing's been filed yet.
I'm not so sure. I thought that the citizen, you know, are you sure of that? I thought you
Yes.
could file anytime. And as long as
Yeah,
the
but
deadline's,
no one does that. They wait till November when the citizens warrant articles are available, and that's
Okay.
I think it opens in September, the
okay,
end of this month.
Yeah. So there's
Okay.
nothing available now,
okay.
and they wait till the end anyway.
Okay. So we have the 17th as our next targeted meeting, and
Let's see. Yeah, let's see if we can get this data guy. If we can't get the data guy, then we can talk about who else we would want.
yeah. The finance guy would be good.
Yeah.
And we've had the steamship authority representative in the past. We've had the assessor in the past, as I recall.
Yes,
Maybe it's
That's
time for the
the same
airport
guy.
guy again. Maybe it's time for the
Same
airport guy
guy.
again.
Rob Rainey. I know Rob, it's the same guy. But, you know, we haven't had in a few years. Well, I wouldn't mind, although I only have one issue with her, is Lauren Sinatra, who's the town's energy person, who's the one responsible for trying to make sure that we don't end up with a third cable. And we can talk to her about solar, you know, solar displays and solar rooftops and stuff like that, if you folks are interested in that.
That might be a good thing.
And
I
there's
know
also planning, somebody from planning. Another possibility.
have we ever had somebody from the planning board?
How about Andrew Vorse?
Yeah. I don't-
Yes, the answer is clearly.
That'd be interesting.
Well, but I think the next time we have, well, I don't think we need planning board until something comes out of, you know, the short-term rental working group, and that's months down the road. That's months down the road.
Okay.
Okay, we'll go step by step then. And so we'll try to get the data person and maybe the energy person would be good as well. So yes, I've watched a number of HDC meetings, and they're approving rooftop solar right and left, so long as it's on a black roof. That seems to be the big issue. They want the panels to disappear as much as possible. Unfortunately, if you have a traditional Nantucket roof, it's not black. It's you know, grayed out cedar. But that's what they're demanding these days.
Well, they were also giving people a hard time if the solar panels were visible from the road. So for a while, they kept saying it has to be the back part of the roof. And some poor folks made application, and, you know, the sun was not coming from the back part of the house, it was coming from the front, and they got a lot of problems with that.
They say that they want the roof, the solar panels where the sun don't shine.
Yeah, right. But they got beat up a lot on that, so I think that they're much more amenable to proper solar roof installations these days, I think.
It's another 10-year process where it seems outrageous the first time you hear about it, and then people become more comfortable with it.
Yep.
And we're I think down the road there. Well, good. So anything else we need to do on future speakers? Because we have public comment coming up, and I see a member of the public who looks like he and she, or he or she, would like to make some comments. So maybe, does anybody from the public like to want to be recognized for public comment? Francie, yeah. You need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Francie Neely. And I enjoyed listening to Select Board Member Brooke Moore. Thanks for having her on. And just a gentle suggestion, it would be really great if you all could allow questions from the public of your speakers. You did that, I think, last time you met when you had the traffic, the fellow who was fairly new to the island in traffic. And anyway, it would have been nice because I had a question I would like to have posed to her about some things. But anyway, that's just a suggestion.
Just
And
feel
also-
free to raise your hand to remind me, because I think I did say members' questions and then did not go and ask the public. So just remind me, and that will be helpful.
Well, thank you very much. I just, when you said members, I thought maybe you didn't want us, so that's the reason I didn't want to interrupt. But yeah, that would be very helpful. Thanks so much. And I guess I'll pose my question to her separately. Also, it would also be helpful, those of us who'd like to make a public comment, although it's very interesting to listen to, as I said, to Ms. Moore, is also to allow us to speak before you start the scheduling things. That took up a good bit of time. Just a suggestion, but I appreciate the opportunity to speak in any event. And I just wanted to say that I am personally, and Monomoy Civic Association is very interested, as you know, in the short-term rental issue. And we want to survey. We have surveyed that in our area, and we'll continue requesting that you do so as well. But I would like to know, and I think you haven't done this yet, if I understood you, Peter, but we would very much like to know what your process is going to be with regard to interfacing with the advisory committee's representative on the work group. Is that going, we would ask, and I'm sure you would agree, that it be completely transparent, that the public see what input your committee gives your representative and vice versa. Have you formulated any thoughts on that subject?
Well, you might have sort of blanked me out as I just discussed that, I think like 5 minutes ago. And I was making suggestions, I was talking out loud, and I was suggesting at that time that, and I believe I said something similar to Brooke Moore when she was on, that it was my hope, and we'll see what the committee wants to do, but not today, that as this process goes forward, and we don't know which one of our nominees will be selected, but that once the STROG, I'll just call it the STROG because it's easier than saying all those letters, gets working, and we actually have a schedule of when their meetings are, that after each meeting that we might hold, and after, is, I don't know, is a day or 2 days or a week, depends on what their meeting schedule is, that we might have a meeting of our own, a public meeting. And I think our only requirements, we have to how many days notice do we have to have in order to have a public meeting? Kathy, do you
Yes, we
remember?
need to, it needs to be 48 hours working days. So that's why it's complicated for us meeting on Saturdays, because that doesn't count. So we have to notify the town. If we have a Saturday meeting, we have to notify them by Tuesday, close of business, so very first thing Wednesday morning. So it's 48 hours technically.
So without getting too deeply in the weeds, the idea will be, once the STROG actually has an agenda and starts doing something, first of all, any of us, I think there's going to be public comment sessions at those meetings. So anybody can, without having a representative there, make their ideas known. But we will have a representative there, and our representative, each one of them had to commit to consult. And I thought that the appropriate way of consulting would be in a public meeting, so that the members can have a dialogue with them, and the members of the public can have a dialogue with them as well. So that's, in a few more words, I think what I've said earlier today. It's not set in stone yet, but that's my idea, and I think that the committee is likely to work in that way. Of course, if the strongest meeting, 2 and 3 days a week, I would expect we might have one meeting a week rather than lots and lots of meetings. But we frankly don't know how they're going to approach all this, and we are very, very aware of what your issue is, and I don't think we've taken a position one way or the other on that issue. And indeed, I think you've given a definition, which would be helpful if you could, if you were to write it the way you'd want to write it, how would that look? Because then we could talk about it as intelligently as possible. Because we want to have, I think, what we say reflect what you're thinking as well.
Great.
I don't know how we could be more open than that.
Can I just ask you one thing about that? Just on the question you're talking, and I appreciate that, about my lay effort. I was not acting in my legal capacity when I wrote you what some of the things I thought about when I defined commercial short-term rental. But I did that, and I'd be interested in your feedback. What if I would certainly respond to that and say, I've given you some feedback. I've given you a definition. It's not the definition, I grant you, but it's a start. And I'd be interested in y'all's comments. And maybe that's something you could consider
Sure.
doing at your
Well,
next.
I think what we should do is add to our agenda for the next meeting. And maybe we could have a discussion of that if it's appropriate. And that way we could have, whatever the state of the wording is at that point. And we needed it sort of advanced, because I have some thoughts, and the usual nitpicky thoughts that you would have with one of your colleagues.
Right.
What does this mean? What does that mean? And have you really followed that all the way down the line to think about what the result is? But that kind of thoughts. So let me just ask other people, because these are just my ideas of how we might conduct ourselves.
Sure.
Gary, I think you were. Yeah.
First of all, I think that for the first few meetings of the working group, there'll be no decisions made. I would be really surprised if after the first 1 or 2 meetings that there are decisions to be made, which our representative will come back to our committee and talk to us about it and see how we feel about it. But nevertheless, we'll find out. And in fact, every one of those meetings of the short-term working group will be open Zoom meetings. So we can all see the same thing, that our representative, whoever represents us, will be in the same room as he or she. All of us will be together. So because all those meetings are open. The second thought I had is that I'm not so interested in trying to define what commercial is or not, because I'm only interested in whether the short-term working group has come up with a category which then needs defining, because we can come up with something, and if they're not considering it, why are we wasting our time talking about some definition when, the short-term working group isn't even going to consider that. It's not on their agenda.
Go ahead.
Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what's on the working group's agenda will be what the members propose, I assume. And it may well be that we, as a group, feel that a well-defined commercial definition is something that we either want to accept or reject, or, in other words, propose or not support. So I'm happy to think that's really what we need, is a better understanding of what Monomoy's position is when you parse the difficulties with trying to define what constitutes commercial, because obviously a very basic commercial use is any monies, right? That's commercial. And yet I don't think Monomoy's position is that anybody who takes money, is in the business of short-term rentals. So obviously there needs to be some definition put around it, and we need to better understand what that position is.
So Evan, I think you got I just want to give Evan a chance.
Sure.
Yeah.
Evan, you're
Well, I
muted.
just want to introduce myself first and say, hi, Evan Jones here. I appreciated your meeting. It's the first one I've joined. I'm a non-voting taxpayer. I work with Francie in Monomoy, but perhaps I'm joining also in an individual capacity. One of the reasons that we're starting to come to your meetings and, thinking about joining is to try to understand and evolve your governance so that as these issues that you're taking to the town become more important, and maybe the ones in the past have been highly important as well, but some of these topics are quite important to our neighborhood and other non-voting taxpayers. So we're very interested in making sure that you get real feedback from non-voting taxpayers when you represent positions publicly and to the town and for town meeting. And some of this anxiety came, frankly, from the last town meeting, when I believe that you took the position essentially supporting unlimited short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods, which is what Article 42 would be. And our neighborhood is strongly opposed to that. We had a meeting of our association a week or two ago, I guess, and you would be surprised to see how many homeowners came out and unanimously are opposed to purely commercial short-term rentals. And one of the premises is we're a zoned residential neighborhood. And so really what we're looking for is preservation of existing zoning in some ways. And we would encourage you to, during your meeting, think about how you're going to gather the feedback from your constituency, which, we've heard various things represented as to who your constituency is, but your name says it's non-voting taxpayers. So I guess it's just chiming in to say, I sat in an hour-and-a-half meeting. I thought that you could have spent a lot more time starting to plan now on how you're going to gather the feedback to represent the views of non-voting taxpayers at these upcoming meetings. Is that going to be in writing? Are you going to take positions that you believe are supported by your constituency and allow people to comment on that? But I would suggest it should be in writing. You should outline a process to do that. And, it's probably a longer-winded comment. Maybe one last one to Mr. Beller. Gary, I appreciated your saying that housing is the #1 issue on Nantucket. I respectfully would say the #1 issue on Nantucket is the pro-development bias that is pushing the growth on Nantucket to a point where it can no longer be sustainable. And we're, nearing that point when you just think about capacity of services and how much overbuild can there be here? So housing to me is a symptom of a much bigger problem and an attitude of our government basically to support the maximum amount of development here on Nantucket. So
Okay.
thank you for your moment to
I'd
speak.
like to hear,
I may
Thank you.
try to
Thank
join
you.
your group.
It's great
but
to
I
hear.
would-
Great to
Sorry.
hear from you. I appreciate it. Instead of debating today, I would like to, tee this up as the issues actually become more known in the future. I think that we've had open meetings for the 6 or 8 years that I've been involved here. This committee has been around for, I think, 30 years. At this point, there is a bylaw, which I commend everybody to read to understand what the purpose of the committee is and what our actual duty is. Anybody else has comments? I think we sort of heard from everybody, and Gary, because he would have his hand up, and then Francie, and then we'll.
No, I'd like to respond to Evan. I think that, first of all, I think the number one issue on the island really is the affordable housing issue. On the other hand, I am in violent agreement with you that the real estate industry on Nantucket is hurting us. It has unbelievable power, and I don't think you're aware of the battle that we fought and lost on your behalf, not just your behalf, my behalf, Kathy's behalf, and Tom Nevers. 2 years ago, we started to ask the town to put an article on that would give seasonal residents and local residents a break from heavy construction during the high season. I took some of my Palm Beach stuff and I presented it to the town and said, just during the high season, July and August, let's not have heavy demolition and excavation on every night, weekend, stuff like that. Anyway, we fought, and we had a member of our committee appointed to a town work group, and guess what happened? We lost the vote because the town committee had a whole bunch of people from the real estate industry, from the construction industry, and they finally decided that they weren't going to make any changes island-wide with respect to heavy construction, even on July 4th or on Labor Day or on Sundays, but that they would make one slight change, which is to change the hours, the working hours, from 8 till 8 o'clock at night to only 6 o'clock at night during July and August. And then, to make it worse for us, they said, but that only applies to the Downtown Historic District and the Sconset Historic District. And I said to them, what about the folks in Tom Nevers? What about the folks in Monomoy? What about the folks in Brand Point? What about the folks in Mattocket? And they said, no, we're not changing the rules. We have a short season. We got to get the construction done. And that's tough if you don't like the noise. So we agree with you that the real estate construction industry has much too much power on this island. And we all feel the same pressure you feel, that we have an unsustainable infrastructure for the amount of people that are here in high season. And no one's figured out how we can put a stop to that, because, money is money and people are selling these properties for huge amounts. And the real estate industry seems to have much more sway than anybody else. And when you go to the town meeting, those are the folks that show up, unfortunately, and we can't even get some relief when we try.
Yeah, Francie.
Real quickly, just back to Mr. Khan, I think had a point with which I just want to express agreement. You do already, the advisory committee has input from Monomoy, including its non-voting taxpayers like me and Evan, that is data-driven, that is based on the survey that shows that Monomoy, purely residential neighborhood, is absolutely opposed to commercial short-term rentals. And that data, I would respectfully say, should inform already what this advisory committee's representative takes to the work group. That's data you have been given. So it's not a blank slate already. And rather than just wait for the work group to see, of course the representative will be listening to others, but this representative, your representative, I would say, and I hope representing non-voting taxpayers, already has a very strong data-driven point of view from what should be your constituency that I hope will be expressed in the work group.
Can I just, just to be clear, Francie, is this data, I mean, is this data that actionable? For example, I'm not convinced, I don't know at this point whether, what the definition, this survey was not, with all due respect, was not particularly professionally done. It was done by a bunch of homeowners, which is understandable, but we all know as lawyers, and particularly those of us who are trial lawyers like you, that we fight all the time about the structure and the appropriateness of how questions are defined and prepared. And to just say commercial, that was the point I was trying to make as well. Commercial means many things to, different things to different people. And we need better definition of that. I'm all for having that discussion. And better understanding what you say the Monomoy position is. But to simply say it's against commercial development doesn't tell me anything, okay? Because I don't know the definition of what you used as commercial.
I've given this committee
I saw that, but that is well, we can go into this next week, but that definition was not particularly helpful.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that.
That's a generalized problem, is that you have put a lot of faith in the survey, and quite frankly, it appears, because of the definitional problems, that the question being asked was somewhat ambiguous. And it's kind of like my rental, which, by the way, I don't rent, but if I did rent, any rental in theory is commercial. But because maybe I only do it 8 weeks of summer instead of all summer long or whatever, that makes it, not primarily commercial, whatever. There's a problem with your survey, and I think you really need to think about that. And we understand the general thrust of it. I could ask a lot of people and they would say, oh yeah, we're against commercial rentals. And then when that commercial rental exception, it seems to apply to what they're actually doing, they're not so much against it. But we're not going to debate that this time. We can take this up in a more organized fashion. Your survey is your survey, but I think the bounds of your survey are more limited than what you claim they are. Evan, then we'll
just
bring this
very briefly.
Yeah.
It's fair to say our survey wasn't perfect. What we're advocating for is this august group here, to, if you want a different survey, try to organize it and get the feedback from people that live here as non-resident taxpayers on Nantucket, and come forward with a view that represents a consensus view, not one that's created by half a dozen people with a very loose process to inform that.
It's fair to say that what we have right now are ears, and we're listening. Number one. Number two, and I think this is really the biggest problem we all face, is that we have voices, we have brains, but we don't have votes.
Nor
the voters have
funding,
decided this.
Evan. We have no funding. I mean, to do a survey, to do a professional survey, an expensive process that we have no funding for.
You could ask the town for funding. That's not really
anybody can ask the town, but we're not. If you take a look at our bylaws, you'll see that we are not organized for that purpose.
Maybe you should try to change your bylaws.
We actually have on
It won't
occasion.
happen, it won't happen in time for the, for the STWR.
Understood. We're simply joining you today to help.
And we want that. That's what
advocate for
I was
change
suggesting,
among your group.
by the way. So don't get me wrong, this is my whole point was to have this discussion, and we'll have it in 2 weeks, to better understand what your people, what you think, so you can inform us what this survey apparently you think says, so we can better understand that. Because as we read it, we don't know the definition. If you're telling us, okay,
I have given you what I think that my definition is, and it was not any rental, it was primarily. So the examples that have been given today were absolutely not accurate. I mean, it's not if you did it a day, we would consider it commercial. So
Right.
I have
It's
already
100
offered, if
sorry.
I could just finish, thank you. I agree with you, Mr. Khan. This is a subject I hope to discuss on September 17th. But what I am asking you all to do is comment on in a way, not just picking apart ours, but asking real questions about how about this situation, how about that situation, and coming up with your own definition. Why don't y'all come up with a definition? I mean, we have told you Monomoy is absolutely opposed to it. I'll use Evan's word, purely commercial. And there's a purely commercial short-term rental being operated in Monomoy right now at 32 Monomoy. It is owned by the Copley Group, Boston-based, as you know, and it is only used for short-term rentals. We are opposed to that. Will you let the work group know that? That's very clear. Anyone can understand that definition.
That's, well, all right. Well, I've got a lot of questions, which I'm happy to discuss on the 17th, and that'll be great.
Sure. Good. Okay.
Okay, Don, do you have a comment, Don?
Yeah, there must be a governmental legal definition of these things. We don't have to go making them up. It must be written down somewhere. I actually looked up,
We actually do have to go making them up.
I did look up the words commercial, and it is much more complicated than just calling it that you don't want commercials in your neighborhood. Commercial implies a whole chain of a business endeavor, and may at the top even be investor owned, which you tell me this one is. Short-term ones that occur just in your community that they own are trades. This is the way the legal definitions go. So if somebody is the homeowner and they rent out their space for either part of the year or the whole of the year, they're really dealing in a trade. So the definitions matter, so that, everybody's on the same page and talking about the same thing. You just can't come along and say, I don't like something, therefore I'm going to define it this way. There has to be a legal definition.
So
Yeah.
I have,
I'm going to give you the last word, and then
okay.
and then also just because I know you're probably going to be interested in this. Have you seen the recent Fifth Circuit case on short-term rentals and interstate commerce? Because I think it's going to be an issue that will, the Fifth Circuit is not dispositive in the First Circuit, but it's like a week old, and I'll send you the citation.
Right. That's good.
Because I think it'll be helpful to you. And then there's also a Third Circuit case, because all these cases just show how we're not writing on a blank slate, and they're the way in which the STROG will be able to achieve a workable regulation. There are always already some meets and bounds that are going to have to be attended to. Anyway, I think you'll like the case.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I don't know about it, and I'll read it with interest. But thank you for giving me there'll be a quick last word. now I will put my law hat on. I have read a lot of the law on this. I've read the Styler court case. That is the controlling Massachusetts Superior Court case on this subject. I've read how they define commercial. I've also been reading what a number of other Massachusetts or New York or Maine communities have done in terms of the way that they are regulating and restricting short-term rentals. And there are different approaches. That is absolutely the case. But there is not one hard and fast rule. It's about coming up with something that makes sense. And so I have been reading that. I encourage you and your representative to read those things. But I also, once again, and then I'll be quiet, I would say you do have data from Monomoy that says, and this is very easy to understand, we oppose the Copley groups that own properties solely for short-term rentals when they are in a residential only neighborhood. And again, we respectfully request that you make that view clear through your representative on the work group. Thanks so much.
Okay, and what I'll do, I actually giving you the last word, but I have one word.
Okay, fair enough. Let's go.
I think it would be helpful to us, at least to help explain to others what the impact, the negative impact is from a Copley group rental versus a rental by an entity that is not in purely commercial or primarily commercial, whatever the current definition is, because typically, you know, people are going to be interested in saying, okay, I may understand that there's a difference between well, I don't know what the definition is, but between one kind of renter and another kind of renter. But is there any difference in impact on the community from the rentals that occur? Because that is, you know, and we don't need to answer today. Indeed, I'm not inviting an answer. I'm just suggesting that in addition to what you've done, and perhaps you've already done this also, some notion of what the harm is that flows exclusively from this kind of renter versus some other kind of renter. Yeah. Okay, so is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it looks like it's unanimous. Thanks. This is the longest meeting we've ever had. Then I'll send you that site. I'll send you 2 sites actually. Thanks. They may be helpful.
Good night.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye.